The smile was the part that Grand Admiral Vethesius would remember. Not the ship. He had surrounded ships before. Not the weapons exchange. There had been no weapons exchange, which was itself unusual, but not what he would remember. Not even the outcome, which was the thing that the history books would record and which the Concordance councils, formal review, would analyze, and which his own after-action report would spend 40 pages describing. What he would remember was the smile. He had seen it on the visual channel, which he had opened at 081 for, because he wanted to see the human captain's face when she understood the situation. He had opened the channel because in his experience, a commanding officer who understood a hopeless situation in full showed it on their face, and seeing it helped him understand that the situation was resolved. He had opened the channel and he had seen her face, and she had smiled. Not the small smile of someone maintaining composure under pressure. Not the tight smile of someone performing confidence they did not feel. Not even the resigned smile of someone who had accepted a difficult situation with grace. A full smile. The kind that reached the eyes. The kind that happened when someone found something genuinely, specifically delightful. She was looking at 19 ships surrounding one of hers, and she was smiling like she had just received very good news. He had been doing this for 27 years. He had been in this specific situation, the overwhelming force, the encirclement, the visual channel open to confirm the hopeless quality of the position 9 times. The other 9 captains had not smiled. He had said, despite himself, "What are you smiling at?" She had said, "Something I wasn't certain I'd get to see." She paused. "I'm glad it worked out," he had said. "What worked out?" She had said, "I'll explain." But first, she had paused. "Do you have the convoy manifest?" "The full manifest, not the summary." He had said, "What convoy manifest?" She had said, "For the convoy you're here to escort." She paused. "I sent it to your flag vessel 3 minutes ago." She paused. "You should have it by now." He had not known about any convoy manifest. He had not known about any convoy. He had ordered a check. The check had taken 2 minutes. At the end of 2 minutes, his communications officer had come to him with an expression that was not the expression of a person delivering routine information. She had said, "Admiral, there is a convoy manifest in the flag vessel's secure communications queue." He had said, "For what?" She had said, "A humanitarian supply convoy, sir. 43 vessels carrying medical supplies and agricultural equipment for the Kurith Station cluster." He paused. "The convoy is currently in transit." Paused. "The manifest is addressed to us." He had said, "To us specifically." She had said, "To the Keth Sovereignty Fleet's 3rd Armada." "Yes, sir." She paused. "The manifest includes routing data and an escort protocol." He paused. "The escort protocol specifies that the 3rd Armada is to provide protective escort through the Pellucid Corridor to the Kurith Station cluster." He had looked at the manifest on his display. He had looked at the human captain on the visual channel. She was still smiling. He had said, "Explain." Her name was Captain Amara Vasquez Mensa. She had been commanding the CSS Horizon for 2 years, which was not a long command history, but which had been 2 years of the specific kind of experience that the outer reaches provided, situations that the manual had not anticipated, problems that required solutions that did not exist yet, and the accumulated judgment that came from solving those problems in the specific environment where the margin between a good solution and a bad one was most visible. She had been planning this operation for 6 weeks. Not this specific operation. The operation she had planned for was a different one, a simpler one, in which she had used a routine supply convoy as a way to get the 3rd Armada's attention in a specific part of space at a specific time. The operation she had planned was, be here, with a reason for them to also be here, at a time when their being here served a purpose. She had not planned to be surrounded. Being surrounded was not part of the plan. Being surrounded had happened because the Third Armada was slightly more aggressive in its approach geometry than her model had predicted, and because her first officer had made a navigation call that in retrospect was reasonable given the information available at the time, but that had resulted in the horizon being inside the Armada's formation before the formation's intent was clear. The being surrounded part was not the plan. What she had done with the being surrounded part was the plan. Or rather, what she had done with the being surrounded part was the skill that 6 years of Outer Reaches service had produced, which was the ability to find what was useful in whatever situation presented itself. What was useful in being surrounded by 19 Keth sovereignty ships was that 19 Keth sovereignty ships were paying full attention to her. Full attention was what she needed. She had their full attention. She had used it. The convoy manifest was real. This was the first thing Admiral Vethesais confirmed, because the obvious hypothesis was that it was not real, that it was a fabrication produced in the minutes between her encirclement and her transmission. He had his intelligence officer run full verification. The verification took 22 minutes. At the end of 22 minutes, his intelligence officer said, "Sir, the convoy manifest is genuine. The 43 vessels are in transit. The cargo is accurately described. The routing is consistent with standard supply convoy operations to the Kurith cluster." He paused. The manifest was filed with the Concordance's Supply Coordination Registry 7 weeks ago. He said, 7 weeks ago. He said, "Yes, sir." "It predates our operational orders by 4 weeks." He said, "Our operational orders were issued 3 weeks ago." He said, "Yes, sir." He looked at the manifest. The manifest had been filed 7 weeks ago. His operational orders had been issued 3 weeks ago. The convoy had been planned before his Armada's operation existed. He said, "Did she know we were coming?" His intelligence officer said, "Unknown, sir." The manifest's filing date predates any public information about our operation. He paused. Whether she had access to non-public information about our operation is not determinable from the manifest alone. He opened the channel to the horizon. He said, "Captain Vasquez Mensa, the convoy manifest is genuine." She said, "Yes." He said, "You filed it 7 weeks ago." She said, 7.5 weeks, actually. He said, "How did you know we were going to be here?" She was quiet for a moment. She said, "I didn't know you were going to be here." She paused. "I knew someone was going to be here." He said, "Explain." She said, "The Pellucid Corridor is the primary transit route between the Concordance's core systems and the outer reaches." She paused. "In the past 18 months, there have been for significant military movements in or near this corridor." He paused. "Not all of them were yours." She paused. "But the corridor is strategically significant, and strategically significant corridors attract attention." She said, 7.5 weeks ago, I assessed that the corridor was likely to see a significant military presence within the next 3 months." He paused. "I didn't know whose. I didn't know when exactly. I knew it was probable." Sighed. "I filed the convoy manifest 7.5 weeks ago because a humanitarian supply convoy in transit through a contested corridor. With a filed manifest and a clear registration in 43 vessels of medical supplies and agricultural equipment is a specific kind of asset." He said, "What kind?" She said, "The kind that changes what military forces in the corridor are doing." He paused. "A fleet in a contested corridor is a fleet making a statement." She paused. "A fleet escorting a humanitarian convoy through a contested corridor is a fleet doing something different." She paused. "Something that looks different in the Concordance Council's deliberations." Something that looks different to the monitoring stations in the region. Something that is different. He was quiet. She said, "Grand Admiral, I don't know what brought your armada to this specific point in the corridor. I don't need to know." She paused. "What I know is that whatever brought you here, there is a humanitarian convoy 3 hours behind me carrying medical supplies for stations that need them. And your 19 ships are between that convoy and its destination." She paused. She said, "The escort protocol I sent you isn't an obligation. It's an offer." She paused. "Your armada, escorting that convoy to the Kareth cluster, produces a record that is useful to you in ways that I suspect you've already started calculating." He was calculating. He had been calculating since his communications officer had delivered the manifest. The Third Armada's presence in the Pellucid Corridor had a specific political context. The Keth sovereignty and the Concordance were in a period of what the diplomatic community called elevated tension, which was the diplomatic community's way of saying that several things were happening that might produce a conflict and that both sides were watching the other's actions carefully for signals about intent. A Third Armada engagement with a Concordance vessel in the corridor in this political context was a signal, not the signal the sovereignty wanted to send right now. The political moment was not right for the signal that an engagement sent. The political moment required a signal that was, his diplomatic advisor would have said, more nuanced. A Third Armada escorting a humanitarian convoy through the corridor in this political context was a different signal. A specifically, precisely different signal. A signal that said the Keth sovereignty's military presence in the corridor is not aggressive. It is cooperative. It is the presence of a fleet that, when it found a humanitarian convoy in its path, chose to help rather than hinder. That signal was worth something. He looked at the CSS horizon. He said, "You planned this." She said, "I planned for a convoy." She paused. "I planned for the convoy to be in the corridor." She paused. "What the convoy encounters in the corridor was not in my plan." He said, "But you prepared for multiple possible encounters." She said, "I prepared for the convoy to be useful regardless of what it encountered." She paused. "Useful if the corridor was clear. Useful if there was an interested party. Useful if there was a hostile party." He paused. "The specific usefulness varies by situation," he said. "What is the usefulness in this situation?" She said, "In this situation, the usefulness is that your armada has an option that it did not have 22 minutes ago." She paused. "Before the manifest, you were a military formation with a military objective in a contested corridor." She paused. "After the manifest, you are a military formation with the option to be something else." He said, "Something else." She said, "Something that escorted 43 vessels of medical supplies to people who need them." She paused. "That is a specific thing to be." She paused. "It is useful to be that thing in the current political moment." He was quiet for a long time. His diplomatic advisor was standing 3 meters away and was very carefully not making eye contact, which was the behavior of a diplomatic advisor who had thoughts they were waiting to be asked for. He said, "Commander Vethries." His diplomatic advisor said, "Sir," he said, "your assessment." She said, "The captain's analysis of the political signal value is accurate, sir." She paused. An escort operation at this moment, in this corridor, with this specific cargo, would be received by the Concordance Council as a significant gesture. He paused. It would also be received by the monitoring stations, the regional media networks, and the 3 species whose council votes are currently undecided on the Transit Rights Amendment. He said, "The Transit Rights Amendment?" She sighed. "The amendment to the Concordance's transit framework that would give Keth sovereignty vessels preferred access to the Pellucid Corridor for commercial operations." He paused. The council vote is in 11 days. She paused. 3 species are undecided. He paused. An escort operation would be visible to all 3 of their delegations. He looked at the horizon. He said she knew about the transit amendment. His diplomatic advisor said, almost certainly, "Sir, the amendment's deliberation is public." He said she planned the convoy for the amendment. His diplomatic advisor said, or she planned the convoy as a flexible asset and recognized that the amendment was one context in which it could be useful. She paused. The distinction matters less than the result. He said, "The result is that I have an option." His diplomatic advisor said, "A very good one, sir, at this specific moment." He looked at the convoy manifest on his display. 43 vessels. Medical supplies. Agricultural equipment. 3 hours. Behind the horizon, he looked at the CSS horizon. He said, "Captain Vasquez Mensa, why did you smile?" She said, "Because I wasn't certain you'd have the convoy manifest in your queue when I needed you to." She paused. The routing for the manifest delivery is automatic, but automatic systems have failure modes. He paused. I had contingency plans for if the manifest hadn't arrived. She paused. They were worse plans. She smiled again, briefly. The manifest arrived. The better plan worked. I was relieved. He said, "You were smiling because your delivery system worked." She said, "I was smiling because 3 hours from now, 43 ships of medical supplies are going to reach people who need them, and your Armada is going to be the reason they got there safely, and that is," she paused, "genuinely a good outcome." She paused. "I find good outcomes satisfying." He was quiet. He said, "You've been planning this for 7.5 weeks." She said, "The convoy." "Yes." She paused. "I've been thinking about this corridor for longer." He said, "Thinking about it how?" She said, "Thinking about what it is, beyond being a transit route." She paused. "It's a place where the concordance and the sovereignty interact, where what each side does is visible to the other and to observers." She paused. "What happens in visible places matters more than what happens in private ones." She paused. "I've been thinking about what I wanted to happen in this visible place." He said, "And you wanted a humanitarian convoy to happen." She said, "I wanted the option for something useful to happen." She paused. "A humanitarian convoy is useful in many scenarios." She paused. This scenario happened to be one of them. He said, "What scenarios would it have been useful in where I didn't show up?" She said, "If no one showed up, the convoy transits safely and delivers its cargo, and the Kurith cluster gets its supplies." She paused. "If a hostile party showed up, the convoy's registration and manifest make engagement complicated and costly in terms of the record it produces." She paused. "If an interested party showed up," she looked at him, "we have this conversation." He said, "You designed it to be useful in all 3 scenarios." She said, "I designed it to be useful regardless of what the corridor produced." He said, "That's a specific way of thinking." She said, "It's what the outer reaches teaches you." She paused. "Out here, you can't design for the specific scenario. There are too many possible scenarios." She paused. "You design for usefulness across scenarios." He paused. "And then you find out which scenario you're in." He said, "And this scenario?" She said, "This scenario is the best one." She paused. "Your Armada, the convoy, the Transit Rights Amendment, the 3 undecided delegations." She paused. "This scenario produces more good outcomes than any of the others." She paused. "I'm satisfied with this scenario." He looked at 19 ships. He looked at one ship. He looked at a convoy manifest filed 7.5 weeks ago. He said, "Captain, I am going to need approximately 40 minutes to consult with my staff and my diplomatic advisor before I can give you a formal response. She said, "Of course," he said. "In the interim," he paused. "Is there anything the horizon requires?" She said, "Nothing urgent." She paused. "We have supplies for another 3 weeks, and our systems are fully operational." She paused. She paused a second time. "Actually," he said. "Yes," she said. "Do you have a good coffee source?" She paused. "The Horizon supply rotation missed our last resupply, and we've been running on the emergency stores, which are technically coffee, but..." She paused. "Only technically." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Commander Vethrees, do we have coffee?" His diplomatic advisor said, "Keth Standard, sir, not human variety." He said, "Ask the captain if Keth Standard is acceptable." His diplomatic advisor relayed the question. Captain Vasquez Mensa said, "Honestly, at this point, yes." He said, "We will send a supply drone in 15 minutes. She said, "Thank you, Grand Admiral." He said, "Don't thank me yet." 40 minutes. She said, "Understood." The channel held. He turned to his staff. He said, "I want a full assessment of the escort option in 40 minutes. Political value, operational cost, transit rights amendment implications, monitoring station coverage." His staff moved. He looked at the tactical display. 19 ships, 1 ship. A convoy 3 hours behind. He thought about a smile. He had opened the visual channel to see the hopeless quality of the position on the captain's face. The captain's face had shown him something else. It had shown him someone who had spent 7.5 weeks building an asset that turned hopeless positions into options. He thought, "I have been doing this for 27 years. He thought, "I have never seen that before." He thought, "I should have." He thought, "The people who learn the corridor learn what the corridor produces." He thought, "She has been learning the corridor." He thought, "For how long, and what else has she learned?" His intelligence officer appeared at his side. He said, "Admiral, I ran a background check on Captain Vasquez Mensa," he said, "and..." His intelligence officer said, "She's been in the outer reaches for 6 years. He paused. "In 6 years, she has been involved in 7 situations that produced anomalous outcomes." He paused. "In 6 of the 7, there was a supply convoy involved." He was quiet. He said, "She's been doing this for 6 years." His intelligence officer said, "Variants of it." "Yes, sir." He paused. "The specific approach varies. The pattern is consistent." He said, "What pattern?" His intelligence officer said, "She builds assets that are useful across many scenarios, and then positions herself in the place where the scenarios are most likely to occur." Paused. "The Pellucid Corridor is the most active diplomatic and military intersection in the outer reaches." He paused. "She's been based here for 2 years. He looked at the horizon. He said, "She came here specifically." His intelligence officer said, "It would appear so, sir." He said, "To be in the place where the scenarios happen." His intelligence officer said, "To be in the place where her assets are most likely to be useful, yes." He was quiet. He said, "Brief me on the other 6 situations after the escort assessment." His intelligence officer said, "Yes, sir." The 40 minutes passed. The assessment was delivered. He gave the order. The 3rd Armada escorted 43 vessels of medical, supplies, and agricultural equipment through the Pellucid Corridor to the Kurith Station cluster. The record was seen by the monitoring stations. The record was seen by the 3 undecided delegations. The Transit Rights Amendment passed 2 weeks later. 11 votes to 9, with 2 of the 3 previously undecided delegations voting in favor. The 3rd undecided delegation voted against. When asked by a reporter why, the delegation's representative said, The escort was a good action. He paused. We still had concerns about the amendment's specific provisions. The reporter said, "Did the escort influence your deliberation?" The delegation's representative said, "Everything influences deliberation. That is what deliberation is." Captain Vasquez Mensa filed her after-action report from the Kareth Station cluster, where the Horizon had docked for resupply following the escort. The report was 3 pages. It covered the operational details of the convoy, the encounter with the Third Armada, the escort arrangement, and the supply delivery. In the summary section, she wrote, "Convoy delivered on schedule. Escort arrangement produced secondary diplomatic benefits as assessed. Resupply at Kareth complete." She did not write anything about the smile. Some things were in the record. Some things were just satisfying.